Hello, everyone, and good morning. And I believe all of you are doing well. We all also are doing well and anticipating that the college will begin soon. Okay, but I know we are not even we did not have a couple of days online classes, but I believe that these recordings are just like our online class, and it is probably more convenient and um, less time consuming also probably for many of you. So I have opted this option, but we will definitely have some online classes also to just clear the doubts and all. So I believe and I expect that you all watch these videos and learn from these classes as well before your exams begin. Okay, so let's get into the chapter that we're going to talk about. So today we are going to talk about chapter 7. We have already begun the life of our patriarchs, and we are talking about, or we are actually studying about the life of Abraham and his family. Okay, so just for 2, 3 more, one or two more, basically more chapters, we are going to talk about Abraham and his life of faith and all the trials and temptations that he went through and how he overcame all those things. Okay, so let us begin the class and let me share with you the screen. Okay, so we are going to begin our chapter 7, which talks about weak faith and a faithful God. Okay, so we can understand by this chapter heading itself that we are going to talk about the weakness of Abraham's faith and our God's faithfulness. Okay, so we as human beings, we all have highs and lows. We all have positive and negative points. We all have weaknesses in our lives, and so did Abraham as a human being. Okay, so let's see what we are going to see in this chapter. So according to the previous chapter, we saw basically a lot of things happening in Abraham's life, where he moved from Ur to Haran to Canaan, and now he's been living over there. And then we see that he's become prosperous, and a lot of conflicts between his men and Lot's men, and because of that, they had to separate, and Lot moved to a different direction as allowed by Abraham and as offered by Abraham, basically. And then we also saw that how Abraham indulged in a war where with his allies and he to protect basically to protect Lot and some of the other captives. And God gave him success in those days. And we see that Melchizedek, the high priest of the Most High God, comes and blesses him, and Abraham gives tithes to him. So all these things are happening. And then after that, just towards the end of the last lesson, we saw that God cut a covenant with Abraham, and this was a kind of covenant which was the most highest form of covenant which was conducted in those days. Okay, so this is a covenant in which we understand that God, the person who cuts the covenant and the person who walks through the sacrifices with a sword in their hand, they are actually promising and saying that if I break my covenant, you can kill me with this sword. Okay, so God, basically, it was God who had cut the covenant. It was Him who initiated the covenant. It was Him who brought conditions to the covenant. It was Him who promised, and it was Him who actually was responsible if the covenant is not fulfilled. Okay, so here we can see that God was actually telling Abraham that you can do anything to me if I do not fulfill my promises, if I do not fulfill my covenant. Okay, so let's move ahead. Let's see what is happening. So we see a lot of dramatic things that have happened in his life, and we may tend to think or assume that after this so much of dramatic spiritual experience, Abraham would never again waver in his faith. But it is an unrealistic expectation and assumption for any believer, because we live in a foreign world and a fallen world, and are engaged in spiritual battles from day to day. Okay, because our enemy is always active and he's always trying to attack us. Okay, especially in the places of our weakness. So we see that we are always indulging in spiritual war. So it is not easy to stand firm in our faith, and we keep falling and we keep rising. Here we see the crisis of faith because because of the delay of the fulfillment of God's promise. So God had promised him, Abraham, a son, but we see that gradually the time has been passing, and the promise has not been fulfilled. So what happens? So Sarah and Abraham did believe in God. We know that they did believe in God's promise, but their faith in God's timing and the method was actually misunderstood or miscalculated. Okay, so they could not fathom the timing and the method that God is going to choose, and God did not reveal the method nor the timing. So it was very human for them, to do what they did, especially in those days and in the culture that they were living in. It's for everyone. It is easy for us to, fall short of faith when it takes too much of time to be fulfilled. Okay, then we see that they actually could, as human beings, could not look beyond their natural abilities, and they put God in a box. Okay, so we see that it happens with us also many times, that we are waiting on God, and there are many times that we think that things should happen in this manner, or in this way, or in this method. This is the only possible way. And we try to box God in that way. We expect God to work in the way we think is right. We think it can be done or it should be done. But our God is not like that. He cannot be boxed, and He is always a person who gives surprises and does beyond our understanding and imagination. So that is how our God is. So they could not think beyond natural abilities, but God always thinks of supernatural things. Okay, so but God was with them even through their struggle of faith, and even through their battles, and we see that God was with them, and God. God was with them in all those times of troubles, and He revealed Himself not only to Abraham but also to Sarah and also to Hagar. Okay, that is something beautiful. And we see that He established a covenant with Abraham, and circumcision was a sign of it, and by which he could express his faith. So God appears again and reveals the approaching time of the fulfillment of the promise. So we see that again God meets them, and He tells them what I mean, how or which time the Son is going to come, and when the promise will be fulfilled. Okay, so that they can be little relaxed. So God let them know that nothing is impossible for Him. So by the end of this test, or by the end of this delayed period, by the fulfillment of the promise, they will actually realize that nothing is impossible for God. So we are going to look at Sarah and Hagar in this chapter, and we are also going to look at the covenant, how the covenant was formed, and we are also going to look at the visit of the angels. So let's begin the main portion of the chapter. So we see Sarah and Hagar. So we're going to basically concentrate on chapter 16, which is very important in the book of Genesis. Okay, so here we see that Abraham and Sarah were actually facing a lot of difficulties in believing for a son. Okay, and in the process, they choose to do something wrong, which involved Hagar. But God, God is a person who corrects everything, and He's concerned for Hagar and the justice. So we see that yes, the process was long. Yes, Abraham and Sarah, as any human being would find it difficult, very difficult, to go through the process of so long waiting. And by that, in the duration, we can commit a lot of mistakes, just as Abraham and Sarah did them. But we also know that our God does not allow wrong to happen, and He is a just God. Okay, so He is not just not only to His believers, but also to people who do not believe. Okay, so He is just with everyone. So let's see what is happening. Okay, so let's look. This whole chapter basically we'll be looking into by 4 points. Okay, so let's begin. So Abraham, the problems. First, we'll look into the problems from weak faith. Okay, which is in chapter 16, verses 1 to 6. So we see that while Sarah, while taking Hagar as a secondary wife for Abraham to have a child, did not realize the problem she was putting herself and everyone in. So when she actually Sarah chose Hagar, her maidservant, to be the secondary wife of Abraham, she did not understand what was ahead. Okay, she did not understand what the problems were ahead, and how she will be putting everybody into trouble, and a lot of confusion will be created. So Sarah started, because of this decision of Sarah, it started a rivalry between nations that lasted thousands of years. There was a lot of bloodshed, a lot of battle, a war, and this all marked their relationship between the two descendants. Okay, so what happened because of as a result of this weak faith? So we see that because of weak faith, we substitute human reasoning for trust in the supernatural power of God. So instead of trusting the supernatural power of God, we depend on human reasoning for trusting God. Okay, then secondly, we see substituting human schemes for God's plan and power. So instead of understanding God's power and plan, we try to bring in our own human schemes. Then we have pride, quarreling, and suffering in the family of God's people. Okay, so this chapter 16 will divide into four parts, and we'll look into these points in this chapter. It will be, firstly, we'll look at the scheme of impatience. Second, a person exploited. Third, an unforeseen reaction. And fourth, an all-seeing God. Okay, first, let's look into the first point of the first part of the whole story. That is a scheme born of impatience. So we see that it has been 10 years that they have moved to Canaan. So from Ur to Haran to Canaan. And Canaan, they have been living in that promised land for around 10 years. And God had promised a descendant son, but not descendant, but nation that would come out of Abraham. But it has not been fulfilled. Not even one child has been born. So they were still childless. So the hardest thing that they were learning was to wait patiently and to continue to trust in God and His promises. This is the most difficult thing that we can learn from this is to wait patiently. If we are waiting for something on God, wait patiently, and in those times do not lose your trust in God and His promise. So it's not only waiting patiently but also to continue to trust in God and His promises. So God waited till it became impossible in human ability, because God wanted it to be a miracle. So if God would have given Sarah a child when she was able to bear a child, it would have been a natural thing, a natural and a natural biological thing. But we understand that God did not want it to be a natural thing. God wanted it to be a supernatural, a miraculous thing. So God waited till Sarah's biological clock was ticking away. Okay, so and Sarah was concerned because the biological clock was ticking away, and Sarah did not want it to happen because she wanted to have a baby within that time, because after that it was impossible. But God actually was waiting for that biological clock to stop. Okay, that is our God. That is unusual way when we think that everything is finished. That is a time when it begins for God. Okay, though that is how God works. Okay, so we see that though it was impossible for in the human ability, but it was God's plan for it to happen this way. So Sarah probably thought that she had given a lot of time to God, plenty of time to God, and now it is impossible to be accomplished. So now let me do something about it. And she felt justified about it. Okay, so this happens a lot of time with us also, because we think that God has promised something, and we are waiting, and God is not fulfilling the promise. So we think, okay, I have given God a lot of time, it's high time I should step in, and I should take the control, and I should do something to help God. Okay, I should do something to help God so that things work out. Okay, and we feel justified about it. But this is not the kind of help that God wants. God does not want your interference. God wants you to stand by Him and follow Him and obey Him whatever He says. And that is the help we can give God. We should not strategize things. We should not step in and interfere in the plan of God. Okay, so by doing this, we can only bring in confusion. So according, we can see that in they were living in the Mesopotamian region, and the Babylonian laws in those times for the family, it offered a provision. Okay. So if there are childless couples, if there was a childless couple, there was a provision that the wife actually could bring in her maid servant to the husband to make her his secondary wife, and the child born out of it would be adopted by the first wife. Okay, so this was something, and there was another thing. This was from the side of the wife, agreement of the wife. But the other thing was also there, where if the wife is unable to bear a child up till 7 years, the husband could take another wife for himself, and the wife's consent was not required for that. So, nonetheless, Abraham did not do that. He was fine with what Sarah was doing with him for bringing in the second wife. Okay, so Abraham yielded to human reasoning of his wife. They did not pray and consult God. So we can see that what happened here should not have happened. Okay, so yes, Abraham he was not active in taking another wife, but he was fine. He was happy when Sarah brought in Hagar. Okay, he did not stop her from doing that, and that was a normal mentality of any any human being or any man, especially in those days. Okay, they could have one, two, three, four wives according to whatever. Okay, so Ishmael was born out of this relationship, and he represents what that which opposes grace and the supernatural work of the spirit, because this was done in the natural ability. Okay, so this opposed the uh, Ishmael. The birth of Ishmael actually represents opposition to grace and supernatural work of the Holy Spirit. Second thing that we see in this story is that a person is exploited. Okay, exploitation means to make unjust or unfair use of someone, or to take advantage of one unfairly. Okay, so exploitation means that it's out of not it is not the will of the other person, and we are doing something to that person uh, in a way that we take advantage of that person, and we use that person unfairly, which is not right, not in the right way. So that is exploitation. Here, the story seems very sweet or very okay in the English Bibles that we have. But if you go deeper and study more and more things about this chapter, it is not that simple. There was an exploitation that was taking place. Hagar was actually a victim. Hagar was actually being exploited by Sarah. Okay, so Sarah and Abraham, okay, passively, mainly Sarah was exploiting Hagar. Okay, so Hagar, her maid servant, as we see here, I will tell something more about Hagar very soon. So Hagar was an Egyptian slave, as it is written here, according to your book, and she probably was acquired while they were in Egypt. We know that they went to Egypt, and they acquired her in Egypt. So being a secondary wife of Abraham would have been great privilege for her. Okay. So we know that as from a maid servant, she had risen to a level of secondary wife, and this was an achievement for Hagar, okay, in the normal understanding that we have. Okay, so there was nothing wrong in this agreement according to those days, but the plan seems to be morally very wrong. Okay, so according to those days and laws, there's nothing arrangement was nothing wrong, but plan was morally very weak and very wrong. So they unwantingly used Hagar for their own purpose. Okay, so Sarah just wanted to use Hagar for her purpose, just to have a child. That's it. Okay, she did not want to give her any rights, but she just wanted to have a child from Hagar, and that is wrong morally. Okay. Secondly, they were blinded by the low concept of which the slaves were held. So they in those times basically they were also thinking in the same way that the other people were thinking, and the slaves had no right. Their standard was very low, and they were actually nothing. Okay, so their dignity, they had no dignity, they had no rights. So slave was a slave. So she was being used as a slave without any rights, just to have a child. Okay, then third thing we see that the dignity of individual as a person, regardless of his or her social standing. Okay, so a human being, be it a slave, be it a servant, be it anything in any position, deserves dignity that was given by God. But here we see that it was marring or diminishing the dignity of a human being, so which was something very, very wrong. Okay, so next we see the unforeseen reaction. Okay, so soon after Hagar had a relationship with Abraham, they regretted their decision. Okay, so Hagar was not as they had expected her to be. She was, after she became pregnant, she was not that passive and submissive as they had expected her to be as a servant. Okay, Sarah thought that, oh, let me use this woman. She is my servant. Let me use her and have a kid with her, have a child with her, and I will make her pregnant to my husband, and she will say nothing. I will take her child. She will say nothing. Okay, so but Hagar was not like that. Hagar had a voice. She was a strong woman. Okay, so we see that she was not as passive and as submissive as Hagar expected her to be, and she had not given to Hagar what actually we can see here that Hagar was somebody who God had given her. God had given her something that He did not give Sarah. God gave her a child, but Sarah was still barren. So that was a privilege that Hagar had, which Sarah was not having. So Sarah was filled with bitterness at the attitude of Hagar, and she blamed Abraham for it. See, here Abraham is not guilty because Sarah was the one who brought her in. So she is actually now blaming Abraham that because of you, she is behaving in this manner. I gave my servant to you, and now the way she is behaving. Okay, so that's what Sarah is telling Abraham. So once again, we see according to the provision that is in the law, they did something according to the law that was there at that time, but it again did not seek for the will of God. So the Babylonian law allowed, according to the code of Hammurabi, that if a servant, okay, servant girl actually tries to take the legal status of a wife, okay, the mistress could reduce her to bondage as a female slave. Okay, so the slave would always be a slave, even though she is the secondary wife or bearing a child or a surrogate mother of her husband. Okay, so we can see that if she tries to show attitude, if the servant tries to take the legal status of his wife, of a wife, the mistress, the first wife, she could actually bring her down and humiliate her and make her a bonded female slave. Okay, so that was allowed according to the laws of Hammurabi. So Abraham tried to solve this problem by letting Sarah do as she wills as usual. So he gives her freedom to do as she does. And what does Sarah do? Sarah, as a mistress, treats Hagar harshly. You have to understand that she is pregnant. Okay, so Sarah should not be harsh on Hagar at least. So, but we see that Sarah was hard or harsh on Hagar. Who was to be blamed here? Actually, all three are supposed to be blamed here, and all three are guilty. Hagar was filled with pride as she became pregnant, and she acted unwisely. Okay, she acted unwisely by behaving or showing attitude. Okay, so being self-willed did not accept corrections. So she was self-willed, she was strong, and she was not ready to accept corrections according to what we see here. Okay, so then we see Abraham. So instead of trying to improve the relationships between the two women, he took an easy way out and he escaped. We escaped the decision. He did not side her. He did not side him. He did not say anything which he should have done at that time. Okay, but he took an easy way out. He escaped. Okay, he did not want to fall into the mess. So Sarah was too harsh in treating her servant, which followed her own reasoning. So we see all three of them here. All three of them are guilty of doing something that they should not have done. Okay. Now let us see something about, before entering into the next point, I would like to tell something here about Hagar. Okay. So if the way we read the story of Hagar, we think that Hagar is a very negative character. Okay, but if you study more about Hagar, you will find there are some things very interesting about the background of Hagar. Okay, Hagar, as is presented in the Bible, nothing about her background is given. But if you read about her, you will get to know that she was not a simple girl just taken from Egypt or just given to her in Egypt as a slave servant or as a servant. She was not a simple girl. She was actually a princess. Okay, that's what this all is not in your book. This is an extra thing that we are talking about. Okay, so don't include it in the answers and all when the question answer is given in the exam. So this is for your extra information that I'm sharing. So Hagar was actually a princess, and it is said that she was the daughter of Pharaoh. Okay, when they went, we know that they had gone to Egypt some time back, and there actually she was in a palace. She was actually a daughter of the king of Pharaoh, uh, from one of the wives, okay, one of the wives of Pharaoh. So she was the daughter of the king and a kind of a princess living in the palace. She was not a maid servant over there, even in the palace. She was a princess. She was the daughter of the king. Okay, so that is what we see in the background that if you go to read about Hagar, okay, in the Mishnahs and all those books, okay, so it's there. So that's what is written about her. So she was a princess, and when she saw the hand of God upon Sarah and Abraham, she chose to come with them, to leave everything and come with them. So she actually, in a way, we see that she started believing in God when she was in the palace of Egypt. Okay, so she started believing in God by seeing what God had done at that time. She believed and she thought, and she told her father, it's better for me to be with these people who know God rather than stay here. Okay, so she accompanied them out of her own will. So she was not somebody who was given to her as servant, but she opted to serve Sarah because she believed that she's a holy woman and she believes in God, servant of God. So that's how Hagar comes to Canaan with Sarah, and that's why Sarah chooses Hagar, not anybody else, because she was kind of from the royal family. Okay, that was a reason probably why Sarah chose Hagar. Okay, so all these things are going on, and this is a wrong thing that actually happened, and she was done injustice too. Okay, so Hagar was Hagar was a victim over here on whom injustice was being done. Okay, so let's move ahead. How God deals with Hagar now. Okay, so an all-seeing God. Let's move into that. So Genesis chapter 60, verses 6 to 16. So Hagar finally runs away. So we have to remember she is not a bonded labor. Okay, she's not a bonded labor. She was living in a palace and she had a voice and she was somebody over there. Now she had become, out of her own humility, she had become the servant of Hagar. Sorry, Sarah. So now, when she's put in such a position, she will definitely not budge into it. Okay, because her her being is not of that stature. Okay, so Hagar finally we see that she runs away. So Hagar actually also means light. Okay, to run away. Hagar means to run away. Bhag jana. Okay, to run away. So that's her name as it is suggested. Okay, so she runs away according to her name. And when she was facing with so much of experiences, harsh treatment by her mister, she plans to run away and move from that place. But God, we see, He mercifully intervened. Okay? He did not just let her go. Okay? He did not just let her go. He mercifully intervened in the case and through her gives us a new revelation. If God used her to give us a new revelation. So let's see how God dealt with her. Okay, so God was seeing, caring, and guiding to her. So although Abraham and Sarah did not seem to care about Hagar, but God certainly did care about her. So God saw her situation. What did He do? Saw her situation, and He sent an angel to bring her back from her flight. Okay, to bring her back from her flight, what her name suggested. Okay, so God saw her, sent an angel to bring her back. He did not want her to just be disappeared in the desert. So God shows no favoritism. A servant is as important as her mistress. That's what we study over here. And then we see that God in his sovereign purpose would correct the wrong. Then we also see that through this polygamous relation that God would raise a great nation of the Arabs. Okay. So a nation of Arab would be raised through this relationship that was between Hagar and Abraham. So we have to understand who these Arabites, Arab people were. Arab people were very important in Middle Ages. Okay, they discovered mathematics, their astronomy, physics, and they benefited they used all these things for the benefit of mankind. So we see that the angel of the Lord appeared to Hagar, and it was of great significance. You have to understand that Hagar is not a called person. Hagar did not belong to the family, but but God, sends His angel to Hagar, a servant, a Gentile, as you can say. Okay, not from the chosen family. So He asked Hagar to go back and submit. That's what God says. And what does she do? She goes back and submits. She obeys God. She obeys God. There is a flip side we can see over here. Abraham and Sarah doing their own will, but Hagar here accepting her mistake and obeying God over here. Okay, so we see she is actually more interested in following God, and probably this was the reason why she came to Canaan. She wanted to follow God. Now she has heard God and she is going to obey God. That's what her decision was. Authority, we can see over here also, she also represents the rebellious kind of people of this generation who are not hearing the voice of God, but she is the one who heard the voice of God. Sarah did wrong by misusing her authority, but she was still her mistress and she had to admit it and be submitted to her. Okay? So here Hagar recognized the authority of the angel of the Lord, and she had to stop fleeing, and she just stopped pursuing her own will, and then she submitted to God and she returned. God again to to help her, to compose her down, to help her, to encourage her. God spoke some words of revelation for the future. So God actually promised her innumerable sons. Okay, he promised her innumerable sons. Okay, so he said Hagar was promised a son and innumerable descendants. Okay, just as Abraham, she was also promised innumerable descendants. So the Abrahamic promise is also given to Hagar over here. That's very strange and very unique about God, that this kind of Abrahamic promise that God gave to Abraham of having a numerous descendants is also given to Hagar over here, that she's going to have innumerable descendants. The name of her son would be Ishmael. Ishmael means God hears. Okay, so God named her son Ishmael. So she had to remember that God is constantly hearing her, even if in the time of distress, whatever she goes through in her life, when she hears the name Ishmael, when she calls the name Ishmael, she will remember that God is hearing. So Ishmael means God hears, and God gives this because she's going back to her mistress where she will be troubled, where she will be distressed. Okay, and God is hearing her cry. That's what God promised to her. So the Lord revealed the main characteristic of her son also. So, see, God is revealing to her a lot of things about her son, which is convincing her to believe more in God. Okay, so he would be a freedom lover. He would love freedom. He would want to be independent. He would be a wandering person, and always will have a feud with his kinsmen. That means the sons of Isaac will have problems with sons of Ishmael. That's what it will be always. Okay, so comparing a person or people to some animal, here we see that he's compared to a wild donkey. Okay, so it's not wrong according to Bible. It's not something an insult. It was a way of speaking in those days. Okay, it was not that he's calling him a donkey, but it was talking about the characteristic traits. Okay, the characteristic traits of a donkey. Okay, he's talking about that. So that's what he's saying, that he will be like a wild donkey of a man. It simply shows a characteristic trait. Okay, from the beginning to the present time, Arab have maintained their independence, and God preserves them as a lasting monument of His providential care. Okay, so we see that God has taking care of Arabs also till this day, not only Jews, of Arabs also. Then we see the angel of the Lord. Who is this angel of the Lord that visited Hagar? He definitely was more than an angel. Okay, if we see, it says the Lord who spoke to her. The Lord who spoke to her. Okay, so Jehovah. So he did not correct Hagar. We can see that he did not correct Hagar, but okay, uh, okay, you have to see this picture over here to understand this in this beautiful way, that he did not correct Hagar over there, but Hagar realized who this God was, who this angel was, and then she says, you are the God who sees me. Okay, because this angel met her and she says to him, you are the God who sees me. Nobody else has seen me. I am in this desert and nobody else has seen me, but you are the God who sees me. Okay, which means I am going to follow you because you see me. So she was surprised to know that God has seen her in the solitude of the desert. But what surprising thing was that she was still alive after seeing the God. So we all know, and it is always known, that anybody who sees God dies. But the strangest thing, or the unique thing, or surprising thing was she's still alive even after seeing God. So it's not only God seeing her, it's her seeing God and still remaining alive. Okay, so that's a beautiful thing that has happened with Hagar, a life changing incident that has happened with Hagar, a confrontation that has happened with Hagar. Okay, that's what we can see over here. So we see the angel of the Lord. Who is this angel of the Lord? He finds the runaway. He calls us by name. He reminds us of our responsibility. He asks us where we are going. He leads us to confess. He tells us what to do. He says, return, submit, gives us a promise, reveals the future. He is the God who sees. So many conservative scholars actually believe that this angel of the Lord in the Old Testament is a manifestation of the pre-incarnate Christ. Okay, probably it was Christophany, Christ who took the form of angel, who came and spoke to Hagar. Many passages over here give evidences of the quality of the angel of the Lord. As we are going to see here, he is never treated as a created being. He identified himself as the Lord or God. He did not deny that he is Lord or God. He promised to do things which God does or did. He was called by the people who saw him. Okay, so people called upon him, and he did not correct those who called him. So if Hagar is calling upon him as the Lord who sees me, he did not say, no, 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 don't call me God, the Lord. I am not the Lord, I am only. So it's not like that. So when it is God or Jesus coming in the form of an angel or something, they will accept it, and they will not correct the people when they say God or Lord to him. Okay, so he was also called God or Lord in the by the Bible writers. So the many places where the angel has appeared, they have also mentioned them as God or Lord also, and it's not been corrected by the angel itself. So we see that these are the things that were happening. Okay, and this is how the angel appeared to Hagar at that time. Okay, so yeah, so these things were happening, and yeah, something about Hagar also, as I was telling. Yeah, Hagar, we spoke about Hagar as a princess, and we see that God actually was with Hagar throughout all these things. And there's something beautiful that we saw just now about Hagar was that God promised her the same thing that He promised Abraham. So she is also among our patriarchs in a way, we can say, where she is, raised to that level as a woman who, who was promised Abrahamic covenant, and who was promised descendants, multitudes of descendants. Okay, she was promised. This is something very beautiful and life-changing experience of Hagar. So she comes back. Okay, she comes back to home. Now what happens? Let us see. So the second part is we see that the acceptance of the covenant. So now we're moving into chapter 17. So 13 years have passed. Okay, 13 years have passed between chapter 16 and 17. Okay, so between chapter 16 and 17, 13 years have already passed. Okay, so Ishmael has already been born, and now 13 years have already been passed. Okay, after that, so God acts to strengthen the long tested faith of Abraham. So from that time till this time, God did not speak to Abraham और सारा एट ऑल. सारा से तो कभी बात ही नहीं हुई, अब्राहम से बात नहीं किया उसके बाद. So we see what happens in this. So preparation to receive it. So this is God asks him to prepare to receive the covenant. Okay, so we see that 25 years have passed since they have left Haran, and they are trying to walk faithfully before God. So when they stumbled, God lifted them. He appeared to them first in Ur, then in Haran, and later in Canaan. And each time he had some details to add to his promise, strengthening his faith, strengthening Abraham's faith. He even cut a covenant with him. Okay, so Ishmael is already 13 now, and Abraham loves him. Okay, Abraham loves Ishmael because he is the only son he has. Okay, so this is something that is very beautiful. So Abraham wished if God would fulfill his promise through Ishmael, he did not need another son. That's what he was wishing as a father. But God had not changed his original plan. Son had to come from Sarah. Abraham was 99 years old and Sarah 90. Humanly impossible to bear children. At this point, God appeared to Abraham once again. Jehovah revealed himself as El Shaddai. Okay, Jehovah revealed himself as El Shaddai, God Almighty. The God is capable of fulfilling all that He has promised. It was as if the Lord said, "Do not look at yourself. Do not look at your circumstances. Do not look at your weaknesses. Do not look at your human abilities or disabilities. But fix your gaze on the limitless power. Fix your eyes on me, because I am the God Almighty." That is what God was actually telling Abraham. Okay, so we see that with the assurance of God's presence and His infinite power, God gives what would otherwise be impossible. Okay, He said, "Walk before me and be blameless." So this was a kind of rebuke that God gave Abraham. He wanted Abraham to walk blamelessly before him. But Abraham was always falling into something or the other and messing everything up. So this was a final warning that God is giving Abraham. Walk before me faithfully. Walk before me and be blameless. God said, don't do anything wrong anymore. Don't do anything wrong anymore. Walk before me and be blameless. Okay, that's what God is telling him right now. Okay? So that's what God was saying. So Almighty God is telling them, till you do not walk blamelessly, I cannot do anything. That's what God is telling him. So walk before me shows we can experience the very real presence of God when we walk with him. So God was telling him to walk with him blamelessly, trusting him completely. Okay, God had proved his aged servant for trusting in natural than God. Okay, so he rebuked him because he was trusting in his natural ability, natural things rather than in God. Because he was even saying, even I wish if I wish if God would bless Ishmael, my son. Okay, instead of just waiting for any more son, and may God bless him, give him all the blessings that he has promised. That's what he was saying. Okay, but that son was born out of natural ability, not of the miracle. So he had to live in God's presence and walk blamelessly before him, not indulging in any kind of earthly satisfaction. No otherwise, nothing. Be what you are called to be. That's what God says. Holy, blameless before me. Just as righteous by faith was necessary to establish the covenant, a blameless walk is God's in God's presence was required in order to enjoy its provisions. Okay, so let's look at some names that are mentioned in the book of Genesis. All this is very important portion, and it usually is a part of your exam. Okay, so learn this chart. You can look into the names. All these names are given, the references are given, and the meaning is also given. So Elohim, we have Elohim, then we have Yahweh or Jehovah, then we have El Elyon, Adonai, El Shaddai, El Olam. So all these names are mentioned in the book of Genesis, and we can actually use these names while praying also, uh, according to your needs or according to the relationship that you share with God. So it helps in strengthening your prayer. Okay, so you can these are the names basically that are given in the book of Genesis. Okay, so let's move ahead. Let's see promise, that is promises that are added to the covenant or the initial promises that God gave Abraham. So God added new promises every time he appeared to Abraham. So here this time God renews his covenant in one more magnificent and clear way. So what does he do? Let's see. So Abraham was to play. God told him of the implications of the promise that God is giving him right now. He says that Abraham was to play a special role in God's providence. So whatever God is going to do, Abraham had to play a special role in it. Second, kings and nations would come from him. Sarah would be their mother. Within a year, the promise will be fulfilled. The heir would be born. The covenant would be everlasting to his descendants. The Lord would be his God and their God forever. After hearing all this, what does Abraham do? Abraham laughs. Okay, after hearing all these things, Abraham laughed. Hearing that Sarah would become a mother at this age, he was laughing, okay, because Sarah had become 90 years old, almost 90 years old. How can this old lady be a mother? Abraham laughed. Okay, Abraham laughed. Some commentators suggest that this laugh was out of surprise and joy. But if we actually understand the reason, if we actually read it properly, if we actually try to read the underlines of it, we will understand that it is it comes from his petition and God's answer. It becomes clear that the laughter was more from the unbelief. It was not a laughter of surprise and joy, not a happy laughter, but it was a laughter of unbelief and doubt. Okay. It was something like that. हो सकता है जैसे कि something like that. Okay, so he was not laughing in a surprised or a joyful manner. Oh wow, God has finally heard my prayer. Not nothing like that. He was like, how can my wife become a mother in this age? Something like that, smirky laugh. Okay, something like that. So it was some that kind of a laugh. So we try to exalt Abraham so many times that we every negative thing also we pull it and make it positive. Okay, that's not how an individual is, and that is not how Abraham was. Okay, so Abraham laughed, and it was laugh of unbelief. Okay, still God promised, and he would keep his promise. He was then told that he was to name his son Isaac. Abraham laughed. God named his son Laughter. Okay, it was not the name for the, it was not a meaning. Isaac did not mean laugh. It was actually laughter. Okay, laughter, हंसी. उसका मतलब है हंसना नहीं है, उसका मतलब है हंसी. Okay, so that's what Isaac means. So later, when Sarah also got the news, she too laughed. Okay, she too laughed in unbelief. And when she got to know that she will bear a son in this age, but she laughed. She also laughed in unbelief. And that was something that both of them did, but God was going to do something different. They laughed in unbelief, but God is going to change their unbelief into joy, and He would bring laughter to them. That's what God is going to do. And whenever they will see Isaac, whenever they will call his name, they will remember that we laughed at God, we laughed at the promise of God, but they will also remember that God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. Okay, though they laughed at God, but people are going to laugh with them because God has given them joy and laughter. Here we can clearly see a wordplay of Isaac. Okay, Isaac or laughter, as Isaac did not mean laugh, but it was actually the word for laughter. Okay, so God would remind them, "You laughed at me. See, that's what something is going to happen." Okay, Abraham substitute suggestion. Okay, what we see, what still Abraham has to say: if only Ishmael might live under your blessings. Okay, so this actually showed his deep love for Ishmael. He did not want Ishmael to go away from that place, and he wanted Ishmael full heartedly to be blessed by God. How often we want God to accept our substitute for His will. Many times we have substitutes to give to God. God, you can use this. Don't use it. Use this. That's what we do many times. We will ask Him to approve our plans instead of obeying His plans. True prayer, we have to understand what is true prayer. True prayer is not something when we try to persuade God with our own desires, but to accept and obey and enjoy His will. It is His will that we are going to do. That is what our prayer should be. It is not what I want that we should place before God and say, God, you do this for me. Okay, so that is not a real prayer. Real prayer is to accept and obey and enjoy His will, because that brings harmony. Okay, so God would bless him and make him the father of 12 princes and a great nation of Arabs. It was through Sarah that Isaac and the promise would be fulfilled. Okay, let's move ahead. Let's see. Obedient faith to receive it. Okay, so he needed an obedient faith to receive the covenantal promises. So God gave Abraham two signs. Okay, two signs to confirm the covenant. First, it was a change of names. Second, it was circumcision. Okay, signs in the Old Testament, like sacraments in the New Testament, were to strengthen the faith of those who received the promise from God. Okay, the change of the names was God's seal of approval to confirm his part of the covenant. So God changed name. It was not them changing their name, it was God changing their name, and that was a confirmation from God or a sign from God that I am going to fulfill my promise. Okay, so we have to understand it is not we changing our names that brings blessings. When God changes our name, it brings blessings and fulfillment. Okay, so second sign was circumcision. Circumcision was a seal of Abraham and his descendants. Okay, so that was a seal that was to be put on Abraham and his descendants, a sign that they accepted the obligation of the covenant. This was a sign that actually showed that they are accepting the faith and they are accepting the obligations of the covenant. New names, let's see. New names: Abraham, which meant exalted father, was now Abraham, which means father of multitude. And Sarai, which means contentious woman, to Sarah, which is princess. Okay, so there is a vast difference between the first names and the second names. So God brought Sarah into the covenant of her own right. Okay, so God's covenant recognizes both men and women as its heirs. It's only not men, it's also women who are heirs of God's kingdom. So when God changes the name of a person, it is a sign of a change in the character or relationship or a new phase of life. So when God changes name, what is that? Does it mean? It means there is a change in the character, there is a change in the relationship, new relationship, and a new phase of life. A sinner who comes to God becomes a saint. He receives a new name. He is a Christian belonging to Christ. The second sign was circumcision. Circumcision was given to Abraham as a triple sign. As a triple sign. It was, what does this sign mean? It was a reminder of the covenant. It was a sign belonging to God's people, a reminder of covenant obligations. Okay, circumcision was not a new rite. Okay, so don't think that God initiated or Abraham initiated this circumcision thing. It was already found in the Middle Eastern culture. It was already there. So in some of the surrounding nations, it marked admission to adulthood, okay, or in the tribe. Okay, so that's what it is meant in many of the nations, that when they do khatna or circumcision, it marks their admission in as adults and into the new tribe, into their tribe. Okay, that's what it is counted in different parts of the nations. I think God often converts existing objects or customs into signs for his people. So most of the time, it is nothing new that God has installed. It is already available practices that God brings in and changes it, and makes it as a sign for his people. So the covenant was open to any Gentile. Okay, the covenant was open to any Gentiles who wanted to accept the conditions of the covenant. Okay, that's what we see over here. Okay, so Abraham had to do it. His servants had to do it. So God said that servants should also receive the sign of the covenant. So even the servants were circumcised. Okay, so any Gentile who wanted to enter the covenant, enter the tent actually, had to circumcise themselves. Circumcision in itself cannot produce the right relationship with God. So simply you circumcise yourself and it will create a right relationship with God. Doesn't work in that manner. So it needs inner strength. It needs inner dedication to God. Okay, so Judah, basically we all know that the Jewish people were all circumcised, but their heart was away from God. So God, it is not only circumcision that brings you close to God, but circumcision is there, but your inner strength or inner desire to have a relationship with God is more important. Circumcision is like baptism, okay, which was to be outward sign of an inward relationship with God. So when you are having a relationship with God, nowadays we don't have circumcision, we do baptism, okay. But in those days, as pointed by God, it was circumcision. Whoever believed in God had to have a sign, that was circumcision. Okay, so in Deuteronomy, we see a great spiritual significance on the rite of circumcision. So, what was circumcision according to Deuteronomy? It was purification or putting away evil, a change of heart, a change of attitude, dedication of oneself to God, to love him and his people. That was the importance of circumcision in Deuteronomy. So the relationship of circumcision to the reproductive area. So you all know where circumcision is conducted, where it is done. Okay, it is in the reproductive part of the body, especially for the males. In some places, it is also for the females, but it is very horrible. It should not be done for females. It's a horrible thing. Okay, so it is for the basically it was done for the males. Okay, so this relationship of circumcision on the reproductive organ part of a male, it suggests need for purity. We need to purify life at its very source. Okay, need to purify life at its very source. It reminds man that moral impurity must be removed. Man should not indulge in moral impurity. And this is what we see over here. Circumcision talks about where it is done in your private parts or reproductive area. Okay. So finally, circumcision points forward to him through whom all such purification is to be achieved. Okay, all such purification is to be achieved. The Messiah was born of a woman. That's what it is looking forward to. The third thing was signs to confirm. Okay, so there were signs to confirm the covenant. It is the active faith which seals the covenant, which seals the covenant. So the faith had to be very active. Okay, Abraham promptly believed that very day. So we see that Abraham went back and did circumcision for everyone that very day. Okay, so we see that he was very prompt in his action over here. So faith and obedience were the conditions necessary to receive the promised son. Okay, so if they had to receive the promise of the covenant, the promise that was in the covenant, they had to have faith and they had to be obedient. If not, there will be more delay in the promise, okay, or the fulfillment of the promise. So we see, and that is how they will be fully blessed by the covenant. Then some people smiled. Okay, we can see that some people smiled in pitying unbelief or laughed in ridicule. Okay, laughed in ridicule after Abraham announced his new name, Abraham, father of the multitude. Arey, this man doesn't even have a son, and he's saying Abraham, father of the multitude. Okay, what a joke people would have been thinking. They thought it was just a fantasy of an old man, but it was from God. Okay, so the last portion that we are going to see now is the visit of the angels, the visit by the angels. Here we can learn that the Lord and the angels can take form of men. Okay, so they know our secret thoughts. They may eat to prove the reality of the presence and friendship. Some commentators even suggest that the three angels were three persons of the Holy Trinity, but the difference can be observed in the passage that we have in the Bible of Genesis, in the book of Genesis. Two men were angels clearly, and one was Lord. Okay, the references is chapter 18, verse 13 and 22, and 19, verse 1. So the appearance of the Lord in chapter 18 had dual purposes. Firstly, it was to establish Sarah's faith. Okay, Abraham was already trying to walk in faith. This is basically for Sarah. This special appearance was for Sarah. Okay, so Sarah, God wanted to establish Sarah's faith. So to and secondly to announce the destruction on Sodom and Gomorrah. These are the two reasons why the angels appeared. Okay, so Abraham, with a typical Oriental, we know that of that period, he was a person of a very hospitable nature. So he welcomed these three strangers to his house and he entertained them. Okay, without knowing them, he did not know them, but he entertained these strangers. Sarah and the servants were preparing the meal, and Abraham stood with them as they had the meal as a sign of respect. Behind the tent door, Sarah was listening to everything and all the conversations between the angels and Abraham. So before this, the Lord had never ever spoken to Sarah before. But this was the first time when God is going to reveal and and speak promise Sarah. Okay, so she apparently needed a personal revelation from God to restore her faith and prepare her for the role in God's plan. So it would have surprised Sarah when a stranger asked, "Where is your wife, Sarah?" Sarah is the new name, not the old name. Okay, where is your wife, Sarah? And how did the stranger know her name? How did he know her new name? God asked Adam, "Where are you?" To Hagar, sorry, "Where are you going?" God finds us where we are and He reveals our conditions to us so that we can meet, so that He can meet our needs. Sarah laughed to herself, inwardly, silently, in unbelief. They did not hear her laughter, but when she heard she was to bear a son, as she knew that physically it is impossible, she laughed inwardly in unbelief, though they did not hear her. But the Lord rebuked her and astonished her with the knowledge of her inward secret thoughts. So they could know, the angels knew, the Lord knew that Sarah laughed internally and what she was thinking. And he said that she would have a child within a year. Next time, the same time, she will be with the baby. That's what the angel said. That's what God was confirming to her. And this revelation. Okay, in earlier God was just saying you will have a child, you will have descendants, but this time God confirmed the timing when the blessing will be fulfilled, the promise will be fulfilled. This was a sign to her that God would perform greater miracles of renewing her physically and healing her barrenness. So God is going to renew her physically and heal her barrenness. It was a beautiful promise for a woman of that age. Okay, so God had revealed Himself to Abraham as El Shaddai, the all-sufficient one, Almighty God. Now He asks Sarah, "Is there anything too hard for the Lord?" So God revealed Abraham as El Shaddai, as Almighty God, all sufficient God. And now God asks Sarah to believe in His might and asks, "Is there anything impossible for the Lord?" 18 verse 14. Finally, Sarah is convinced when God spoke to her personally and by faith. Sarah herself received the power to conceive in this. It was not easy for her to conceive in that old age, but God gave her the strength and the power to conceive in that old age. Okay, both Abraham and Sarah were convinced that nothing is too hard for the Lord. Okay, so this was what we were speaking about today in this class about Abraham and Sarah and how they received this promised child of the covenant. Okay, so one more thing just I missed about Hagar was probably Hagar, it's written about as secondary wife, as we have mentioned over here, but it is apart from your, again, apart from your course. It is from the different readings and different studies that Hagar was never married to Abraham. She was only used as a surrogate. She was never married to Abraham. So it's simply that she brought Hagar to Abraham, and he slept with her. That's what is mentioned over there. So Hagar was never a wife to Abraham. I'm telling this now because towards a few more chapters, I'm going to tell you something else more about Hagar. Okay, it is something related to Hagar. Okay, so that's why it will be in connection with that. So you keep these things in mind as we move ahead. Okay, so I hope you have learned something from this lesson. So we will meet with the next chapter, that is chapter